This happened 2 years ago on New Year's Eve. I went over to my girlfriend's apartment, who lived about 10 minutes away from me at the time. I lived in an apartment a little ways across town, and my girlfriend and I didn't have any big plans that night, but we're just going to go out to eat and then come back and hang out. We were going to stay up past midnight to ring in the new year, and then I was going to leave and go back home to my place. So we went out that night, and then we arrived back at my girlfriend's apartment at probably 9 p.m. or so. She lived in a pretty typical apartment building at the time. There was a complex of about 3 or 4 buildings there, and each one on its own had about 4 floors, so it was pretty large. My girlfriend's place was on the 2nd floor of one of the buildings. We hung out in her living room watching TV and just hanging out sitting on the couch. It was a relaxing evening, but about an hour after we got back, suddenly we heard the doorknob to her apartment start to turn. Somebody was trying to open the door. However, it was locked. This caught both of our attention, obviously, and when it happened, I looked over to the door. Then, moments later, somebody started loudly knocking on it. I got up from the couch and then walked over to the door. My girlfriend stayed on the couch and watched from a distance. I went up to the door and there was still someone knocking on it. I opened the door and whoever was there was still knocking on it when I did. I saw a young man standing there right outside. He looked surprised somewhat to see me. I asked what he wanted, and then the guy mumbled before saying that he was at the wrong address. I told him okay and then shut the door. Then I watched through the peephole as he walked away. I went back to the couch and asked my girlfriend if anything like that had happened before, and she said no. She could see the guy from where she was on the couch, and I think he could sort of see her as well. She told me that she did not recognize the guy as someone who lived in the building. I figured maybe the guy was there to visit a friend and got the place mixed up. Seemed like a pretty innocent mistake. At least that's what I hoped it was. The next few hours went by, and then it was the new year and we watched the celebration on TV. A short time later we both got tired and I decided to head back to my place. By then it was probably about 12:30 a.m. and I had forgotten about the man at the door from earlier. I left my girlfriend's place and then started walking through her building to get back to my car. As I was walking down the hallway, I approached the area where the elevator was. I was still on her floor, but when I approached the elevator, I noticed the same guy who had knocked on the door. He was just standing around sort of near the elevator, but as soon as I walked over there, he looked at me, turned, and started quickly walking away. It seemed kind of odd. I continued to leave, but when I did, I texted my girlfriend and let her know that I saw the guy. Then I left the building, got out to my car, and started driving home. I made it just a few minutes into the drive when my cell phone started ringing. I was getting a call from my girlfriend. When I answered, she said that the guy was back. She told me that he tried entering her place again, and then he was knocking on the door. She looked through the peephole and saw him there but did not answer. I asked her if he was going away and she said no, he was still there, so I turned my car around. I stayed on the line with her as I drove back and arrived at her apartment a couple of minutes later. I re-entered her building as she was able to unlock the main doors for me through her phone. I quickly went up to her floor, and when I got there, the man was still there. I saw him standing right out front of her door. When I started approaching, he looked over at me and seemed surprised to see me again. I asked him what he was doing in an angry tone. The man said nothing but turned and started quickly walking in the opposite direction. I chased after him. At that point, we both started running. The man ran to the stairwell, which was at the end of that hallway. He got in there and then ran down the stairs all the way to the 1st floor and then left the building. I didn't bother to chase him down the street or anything, but I yelled at him that if he came back, I would kill him. I obviously did not mean that literally, but I was just trying to scare him. After that, I went up to my girlfriend's and stayed the night there to give her peace of mind. He didn't return that night, and the rest of the time that my girlfriend lived there, he never came back. In fact, she said that she never saw him again, and she doesn't live there anymore. I'm guessing he knew that she lived there, but either he didn't know about me or he didn't think that I was there. I also know that he didn't live in the building. The guy was a creep, and I'm glad that I was able to scare him off. This happened many years ago, back when I lived in a very popular city, and I had only been there for a few years at the time and lived in an apartment downtown. I met this guy through one of my friends and we started dating. We dated for about a year, and he also lived in the city not too far away from me. One year he invited me to a New Year's Eve party that was going to be at one of his friends' apartments. Now, I had met a few of his friends, including the one that was hosting the party, so I was excited to go. When the night came, we arrived at the party, and his friend's apartment was very nice. It was high up in a tall building downtown, and the apartment had quite a bit of space. There was a very large living room as well as a kitchen, and off that was a hallway that led to several bedrooms and a bathroom. There were quite a bit of people at the party, a lot of which I did not know. At first, I talked a lot to my boyfriend's friends and some of their wives or girlfriends. I was talking to one of the other women there for quite a while, and my boyfriend went off somewhere. After the conversation, I had to use the restroom, but I did not know where it was. But I figured I would easily be able to find it, so I wandered off the living room and around a corner to the hallway. Now, in this hallway, it seemed like a logical place for the bathroom to be. I hadn't seen one, and I didn't know where else it would be. All the lights in the hallway were off, and it was darker over there. In the hallway there were about 5 doors, and they were all closed. I could see in the small crack at the bottom of the doors that each one had the lights off as well. I went to a door that I thought was the bathroom and opened it, but this was not the bathroom. It was just a small closet. There appeared to be mostly coats in there. However, as soon as I opened the door, I saw someone right on the other side. It was a man who was wearing all black, including a ski mask which covered his entire head. This surprised me. It seemed really odd, but I thought that maybe it was a joke or a prank that I didn't know about. As soon as I opened the door, I think I said something like, "Oops, sorry," and then I closed the door back within a second or two. The person inside the closet didn't say anything, but I could see that they were looking at me. Then I walked down the hallway and I opened a door on the other side, which happened to be the bathroom. I went in there and closed the door behind me. As I was in the bathroom, I heard a door open down the hallway, which I figured to be the closet. Then I heard someone walking towards the rest of the party. I realized that the masked man was probably leaving. Still, to this point, I was assuming it was a friend of someone and it was all just a joke. However, not long after that, I started to hear some commotion, and then I heard the sound of a man's voice yelling, and everything else got really quiet. The music that had been playing in the background stopped, and the chatter from the conversations did as well. From where I was in the bathroom, I couldn't hear very well as to what the yelling man was saying. I could have left the bathroom at that point, but I decided not to. Instead, I put my head to the door and listened. I could make out a word here and there, but not everything. However, as I listened, it sounded to me like the guy was robbing everybody at the party. He was giving orders and no one else was speaking. After he spoke for a while, I heard a couple of other voices, but they were far too quiet to understand. Then, after a period of silence, I heard the loud man start talking again. I clearly heard him say, "Do not call police," and something about "if anybody does," but I couldn't make out exactly what else. However, I got really nervous realizing that the masked man was quite possibly robbing everybody there. Did he know that I was in the bathroom? Was he going to hurt anyone? There had to be about 30 people at the party, and so it would be hard for the robber to remember them all. So I didn't know if he would recognize me among the crowd or realize that I wasn't there with everybody else. Going against the robber's wishes, I took out my cell phone and called the police. I whispered into the phone that I believed a robbery was going on and gave them the address of the location. Then I hung up so as not to cause that much noise, because it was really quiet other than that. I had locked the bathroom door, so I felt fairly safe in there. But those feelings of safety quickly went away. After things were quiet for about another minute, I heard the man say something that I couldn't make out. Then, about another minute later, he started to walk in the direction of the hallway that I was in. I heard his footsteps get closer and closer. Soon they seemed to stop at the hallway where the bathroom was. I was hoping that he wouldn't go any closer, but after a few seconds, he did. His footsteps got closer and closer to the bathroom. Then he tried to open the door, which was locked. He loudly said, "Is anybody in here?" I did not answer. He tried opening the door hastily a few times, and then took a few steps back towards the living room. As he was walking, he loudly asked if anybody was in the bathroom. I heard someone quietly say something, and the man said, "Then why is the door locked?" I was extremely nervous, and basically holding my breath to not make any sound. I heard a little bit of quiet chatter which I couldn't make out, but then I heard another door which sounded like the main door to the apartment open and close. Things were completely silent for a good minute or so. Then, slowly, the chatter picked back up again of people talking. I thought that the guy must be gone now, and I emerged from the bathroom. When I came out of the hallway to the living room, I saw everyone at the party all sitting and standing at the back corner of the room, staring at me. Everyone looked surprised to see me. I asked what had happened, and they said they were just robbed. I was informed that the masked man had come out of nowhere and brandished a firearm to everyone as he stood in front of the door. He then demanded everyone's cell phone and wallet as well. He had everybody put it in a sack and took a few people's jewelry such as watches and rings. Within minutes he had everything in the sack and then left. He told them not to call the police. They couldn't call anyways because the phones were stolen, but I already had called them and I still had both my wallet and phone. Just about 5 minutes after this, the cops arrived. They talked to everyone and then slowly people left the party. It was one of the craziest things I've ever experienced. I felt sort of guilty for hiding in the bathroom while my boyfriend and everyone else got their stuff stolen. But also, why would I go out there and willingly let myself get robbed? I had no weapon and there was nothing that I was going to be able to do to stop it. Eventually, some of the stolen property was recovered and the man was caught as well. However, some items were not able to be recovered. At the end of the day, I'm just glad that nobody got hurt. A few years ago, I went to a New Year's celebration in a park with my friends. We all live in a city, and one of the big parks there was having a huge celebration. It was going to take place the night of New Year's Eve and run until a little bit past midnight. The park is kind of on the edge of the city, and it's very large. We live in a warm climate, so the weather would be nice and not too cold or anything. At the park, they had food trucks, a live band, and things like that. They also have a big screen in another area that they occasionally use for movies in the park and stuff. So anyways, I met up with my friends there and I parallel parked on the side of this road that led to the park in one spot. I walked there and met up with everybody else and we hung out for a while. I had got there at probably like 8 p.m. and there were 5 of us friends in total, but overall there were hundreds of people at the park. We stayed until the big celebration at midnight of the new year. Then people started leaving. At probably almost 1 a.m. is when we left though. Things were much quieter by then, but there were still a few people around. We walked to the end of the park and then sort of split up. Then I began walking back to my car. It was maybe just 2 or 3 more minutes of a walk away. When I got around the corner to the street that my car was on, there were far less cars there. Next to my car was a grass area and then a woods. There were a few streetlights along the road that I parked, but overall it was sort of dark. I got to my car, hit the unlock button, and then got inside. Right when I did, I heard something to my right. I looked over and saw this man emerging from the woods. I was not sure what he was doing in there, but the man then began to walk towards my car. I did not think that he was going to me and expected him to turn at some point, but he did not. Instead, the man walked right up to my passenger side door and then knocked on the window of it. I rolled down the window a little for some reason. Looking back, I don't know what I was thinking. Some suspicious man walks out of the woods after midnight and knocks on my window, and then I open it for him? I wasn't drunk or anything, so I don't have a good explanation. But anyways, when I rolled the window down, the man just stared at me and didn't say anything for a few seconds. I was confused, but then suddenly he reached down and opened the car door. It had still been unlocked at that point. Then he started to climb in. In an instant reaction, I knew that I kept pepper spray in my center console of the car. I quickly reached for it. When the man entered the car, he started to get closer to me. Without hesitating, I sprayed him right in the face. He moved back and then quickly got out of the car, holding his hands over his eyes. As soon as he was gone, I drove away from there with the passenger's door still open. However, it soon swung shut, and I drove all the way back home. Finally, when I got back, I was able to take a deep breath and relax. I feel very lucky to have gotten out of that situation okay. I'm not sure what that man's intentions were, but I know that it wasn't just to say a friendly hello. He also didn't say a word the entire time. If I didn't have my pepper spray, I'm not sure what I would have done. Last year, on New Year's Eve, I went out to a few bars in the city with friends. We all live in apartments that are pretty close by, some closer than others, and most of us walked and met up at a bar sometime in the evening. There were about 8 of us that night in our group, all women, and we've known each other since high school. That night was a lot of fun. We went to about 4 or 5 different spots, and we stayed out until almost 2 o'clock in the morning. With it being New Year's Eve night, the city was very busy with people going out and celebrating. At the end of the night, nobody was super drunk, but we all had been drinking. That's one of the main reasons that we chose to walk. And most of the places are not that far, maybe 10 to 20 minutes. Mine happened to be the farthest away. I had considered taking an Uber, but I walked with my friends instead. It wasn't that bad of weather. It was a little chilly, but not too cold. When I said goodbye to my friends where their apartment was, it was on the way to mine anyways. My place was now only a little less than a 10-minute walk from there. So I walked down the sidewalk and things quickly went quiet. I didn't live downtown, but very close by. Still, my neighborhood was quieter and not as well lit. When I was walking down the sidewalk, nobody else was around. But I had walked to and from the city many times before, so I wasn't too nervous. Not long after saying bye to my friends, though, I heard footsteps behind me. They were a good distance back, kind of far, and at first I ignored them. But as I continued to walk, it seemed as though they were getting closer and closer to me, and I was not walking super slow or anything, so I decided to look back and see who was there. When I did, I saw a man who was about 20 or 30 feet behind me, and he was looking right at me. He had a short beard and dark hair. When I noticed him, I started to turn back around, but he waved at me. He then started walking even faster. He spoke and said hi. I stopped and turned around and said hi back to the man. It made me feel a little bit better that he was friendly. He caught up to me and said that he saw me at the bar earlier that night. I had not seen him, but the bars were all pretty crowded. I asked him which one, and he mentioned the last one of the night that we were at. He then said that he happened to live over there as well. We made some very small talk about basic stuff like the weather as we continued on. However, much of the walk, the conversation, and the guy's overall personality seemed really awkward. Soon, I arrived at my apartment and started walking towards it. I said goodnight to the guy, but he was still walking with me. He then said that he lived there too. It seemed odd because I had never seen him there before, but I believed him because obviously I didn't know everyone who lived at the place. I just thought that it was a coincidence. So when I went to the building though, I unlocked the door and the guy walked in right behind me. Then I walked over to the elevator and he joined me there. By now this was seeming really awkward. When I arrived at my floor, the man also got off the elevator there. I had never seen him on my floor before, much less in the entire building. When the elevator stopped, I offered him to get off first, but he waved me to go off first and then followed me. So he was now walking behind me as I went down the hallway to my apartment. When I arrived at my door, I said goodnight to the guy once again, and he said goodnight back. I breathed a sigh of relief when he continued walking down the hallway. I realized that I guess he did live in my building. After getting back home, I was pretty tired, so I pretty much started getting ready for bed at that point. But in the middle of my nighttime routine, it was interrupted by a knock at the door. I walked over quietly, wondering who was at my door at this hour. I did not open it, but looked out the peephole. The same guy was there. I still didn't answer, but kept watching him. He stayed around my door, but did not knock again. He was just hovering around there for like a minute or two. Then, finally, he walked away. I was really creeped out. But after that, I never saw him again. Never in the building or around it. It is my belief that he did not live there. That's why he walked in the door after me. I never saw him get out a key or anything. I think he just pretended to live there. This happened back when I was in college. During New Year's, most students would be back home for Christmas break. There was no semester going on at the time, but a number of students would either stay there or go back early. The university was very large, so there would be a good number of people there. I was one of those people that would be on campus for New Year's, partly because the city I'm from is close by. So, on New Year's Eve, I was back at my college house where I lived with two other guys, Corey and Justin. We were not necessarily planning on having some big party, but we were planning on having people over. Our house was good for hanging out at, because we had 2 floors and a basement. The main floor was just a living room, kitchen, dining room, and bathroom, and upstairs was all just the bedrooms. The basement was not really used, as it was unfinished, and there was a lot of random poles and pipes down there, plus the lighting wasn't very good. So we had some good friends over on New Year's Eve, and were just hanging out. A few other people that we knew came over, and by 10 o'clock it started to get busy. Some people went out and others came over. The next thing I knew, there was pretty much a full-on house party occurring at our place. I will fast forward through the party as it was pretty typical. Lots of music, drinking, and hanging out with friends. It went on until about 2 o'clock in the morning or so. Finally, by that point, people started clearing out and leaving. Eventually, the place was empty and my 2 roommates went up to bed. I was about to go up to bed as well, but before I did so, I decided I would quick make sure that nobody was in the basement. I opened the door and it was completely dark down there. I took a step or two down and then turned on the light, just making sure. However, to my surprise, there was somebody down there. It was a woman and she was just barely in my sight. She looked to be college-aged and was not looking in my direction. She was alone and not on her phone or anything either. I called down asking what she was doing down there. She didn't say anything, but looked up at me and then started to walk over towards the stairs. I didn't recognize her and was not sure as to who she was. The girl walked upstairs and then I told her to have a good night. She still didn't say anything and walked over to the front door. I didn't know why she was in our basement because she wasn't with anyone. It's like she was just standing there in the dark by herself doing nothing, and she never said anything to me the whole time. After she left, I went upstairs and then went to bed. I fell asleep really quickly as I was really tired from staying up late. However, sometime in the night I woke up. I typically don't wake up in the night, so this was strange. My room was pitch dark inside, and I just remember that before trying to fall back asleep, I turned over in bed. When I did, even though it was dark, I saw that someone was standing in my bedroom. It was a woman, and I sat up really fast in my bed, wondering what on earth was going on. When I did, my eyes sort of adjusted, and I realized that it was the same girl who had been in our basement earlier. As soon as I quickly sat up in the bed, the girl turned around and ran out of my bedroom. I got up and turned on the light and then left the room. When I did, I heard her still running, and soon after I heard the front door downstairs open and close. I went down and confirmed that she had left. I locked the door and then went over and locked the back door as well. I looked around the house, making sure that nothing was stolen or broken or anything. Things were fine. The rest of my time in college, I never saw that girl again. I have no idea who she was or what she was doing. I mean, she was just randomly standing in our basement in the dark, and then was just standing in my bedroom in the dark as well. It was one of the creepiest things I've ever seen. Last year, I was invited to a New Year's Eve party at my friend Alex's house, who is also my coworker. I've worked at the company for roughly 5 years, and Alex has been there a little bit longer than that, so I know most of the people around the office, but Alex is probably my best friend at work, so I was looking forward to the party. He lives not too far away from me in a neighborhood that I would describe as pretty typical. It's a house that has a living room, dining room, kitchen, and bathroom on the main floor. There's also a basement and upstairs as well. The party was at 7 o'clock at night, and it went all the way until midnight. When I got there, there was already some other people at Alex's house. Almost 10 people from work showed up, and several other friends that Alex had were there, but I didn't know them. I remember that at one point, maybe around 9 o'clock at night, most of the people were in the dining room playing a game. However, a few of us were in the living room, including me, because I wasn't playing the game that round. There was then a knock at the front door, which happened to be right behind me. Most people didn't hear it because there was some music playing and the TV was on. I turned around and opened it up and saw a woman standing there who I did not know. She said that she was there for the party, so I let her in, assuming she was one of Alex's friends. I introduced myself to her briefly, and I remembered that after she said hi, she walked past me and went towards the kitchen. After that, I just went back to watching TV in the living room with my coworkers. Over the next few hours, I played a board game with others in the dining room. When it approached midnight, everybody gathered in the living room for the countdown. Then, after it became midnight and the new year, people started to leave. It was getting late after all, but luckily we didn't have work the next day for the New Year's holiday. I remember that I went back into the dining room though and played another board game with some people. During this entire time, I never saw the woman again. I didn't realize it at the time though. I had just completely forgot about her. So by 1 a.m. everyone had left and I was about to go home as well. It was Alex, another coworker, and me that were there. And after the other coworker left, I stayed back to help Alex clean. I wasn't planning on it, but I saw the place was kind of a mess and I wasn't that tired, so I figured I'd help out. So I remember that I was in the living room and Alex was in the dining room when suddenly we heard this noise. It was coming from the back side of the house, probably near the kitchen, closer to Alex. When I heard the noise, I looked over at him, and he was far away from what it could have been. The noises continued though. I couldn't tell what it was at first, but I saw Alex quickly move into the living room and he had a panicked look on his face. He whispered to me that somebody was climbing through his window. He scrambled past me to the coat closet by the front door. Alex then took out an old baseball bat that he had in there. I heard whoever had entered his house was in the kitchen now, but we could not see them from where we were. It was completely around the corner. There was a doorway that led right to it, but the door was closed. I was very confused and had no idea why somebody was breaking into Alex's house. But Alex started to walk over towards the guy. He stood on the other side of the door. We hadn't heard any more movements from the guy since he had entered the house. Before Alex opened up the door to the kitchen though, he called out to the guy. Alex yelled that he had a weapon and the guy better leave now or else. When he said that, there was silence for a moment. Then a man's voice yelled from the other side that he also had a weapon. Alex and I didn't know what this man was referring to, if he had a gun or what, but we didn't want to take a chance. Instead, Alex and I just took off running upstairs. We both went into his bedroom and locked the door behind us and called the police. While we waited there, we couldn't really hear anything from downstairs. Alex still had the bat though in case the guy went upstairs. We quietly talked back and forth trying to figure out what was going on. After probably like 10 minutes, we were able to hear that the police arrived. When we went back downstairs, the man was gone. The house was empty, but the back window was open. Several items were stolen though. I stuck around to answer questions from the police with Alex. When they asked if anything strange had happened, that's when I remembered the woman. I described her to Alex, asking who she was, and Alex said that he had no idea. He said he didn't know anybody matching that description. It would have been easy for her though because it was pretty busy at the house. I think that maybe she was working with whoever broke in. Perhaps she opened the window for the guy or something. It's really strange, and I don't know exactly what happened there. This happened back when I was a kid. It was New Year's Eve, and I was staying up late because there was no school the next day. I think I was 12, and I lived with my parents and 2 siblings at the time. I remember that year was my first year that I was going to actually stay up until midnight to celebrate the new year. Every other year I had gone to bed well before midnight. So I was in the living room watching movies with my family, and the last movie of the night ended just before midnight. We turned the channel to one of those ones that shows the ball dropping in New York City. After that, my parents said that it was time for bed. My siblings and parents then went up to their bedrooms, and so did I. However, I wasn't really that tired. Like most kids, I loved playing video games, so I turned on my PlayStation, which I had in my bedroom. I remember that it got really warm in my room, and it was cold outside with it being the winter, so I went over and opened up the window a crack. I returned to my gaming chair and now heard the wind blowing from outside. But a short time later, after opening the window, I remember I heard a car door open and close. It sounded pretty close by, but I didn't pay it too much attention. However, we did live in a very quiet street, so I did notice it. Then I remember I heard footsteps entering the snow of our front yard. That's when I got curious and I walked over to my window. My bedroom was on the 2nd floor at the front side of the house, so I had a pretty good view. When I looked out of the window though, the person had just gone out of my sight. It sounded like whoever was there was going into our backyard for some reason, and I had no idea who would be at our house or why. I looked out to the street and saw the car. It was just a regular sedan, but I did not recognize it. I was curious, so I left my bedroom and went downstairs to look into the backyard. All the lights were off downstairs, so I was a little bit creeped out, but I quietly went to a back window, and when I looked, I saw this guy who I did not recognize standing around at the back end of the yard. He didn't really appear to be doing anything, but just kind of standing there. I also just barely saw him. The lighting was not very good, and after about a minute or so, the man turned and started walking back towards our house. When I saw this, I sprinted away from the window and went all the way back upstairs to my bedroom. I was freaked out and just hoped that the guy would get off of our property. But moments later, I heard a knock at the front door. Even though I was all the way upstairs, I heard it very clearly. The entire house was silent, with everyone having gone to bed. In that moment, I was really hoping that my brother, sister, or parents were awake and heard the knock, but apparently nobody did. After about 30 seconds of silence, there was another knock. I went over to my bedroom window and looked out. The man was standing there on the front step. I didn't dare go down and answer the door. I was considering waking my parents or siblings, but I kept a watch on the man instead. He stood around the door for a good 5 minutes at least. The longer he stood there, the creepier it seemed. Then he just walked away. He went back to his car and then drove off. It was very strange. Nothing else really strange like that happened again, and I never saw the guy after that. I told my parents about it the next day, and they were just as confused as I was. I still wonder about that sometimes. Who was that guy? Why did he go into our backyard? And why did he knock on the door? It's very weird. I was hosting a New Year's party at my house one year. I invited a few of my friends to come over to my apartment and hang out. It wasn't a big party or anything, just about 5 of us. My apartment is on the 2nd floor of the building, and even though it's just a 1-bedroom place, there's a decent amount of space there. So we were having a good time until somebody knocked on the door out of nowhere. Nobody else was supposed to be there, so we were all very confused. I was afraid at first that we were making too much noise and somebody was knocking to complain, but I didn't really think that was the case. We weren't being that loud, but I got up and walked over to the door. When I did, whoever had knocked was gone. There was nobody there. I opened the door and looked into the hallway, but there was still nothing. Then I went back inside and told my friends that there was no one there. We resumed talking to each other and having some snacks until whoever it was knocked on the door again. Now, I knew we were not being too loud, so I was confident that wasn't the problem, but I didn't know what else could be the cause of somebody knocking on my door multiple times. Once again, I got up and went over to the door, and once again, nobody was there. By now, I figured that it had to be a joke, or some prank that somebody was pulling. I didn't really know anyone in my building, so I wasn't sure why a prank like this would be pulled on me. But my friends and I got a laugh about it after figuring that's probably what it was. For maybe 30 minutes, there were no more knocks. Then, out of nowhere, we all heard it again. This time, I shot up and ran over to the door. I opened it and looked out. Just from the corner of my eye, I saw what looked like a man sprinting around the corner and quickly went out of sight. I didn't get a good look at him, but I actually went after him running to the corner that he had gone around. But when I got there, I just barely saw that he went into the stairwell. I wasn't going to chase him around the building, so I gave up and I went back. I returned to my friends and I told them how I had chased the guy. Once again, we all got a good laugh about it. My friends stayed for a few more hours and there were no more knocks during the rest of the time that they were there. After my friends had all gone, it was really late. I started getting ready for bed, but when I was doing so, I heard a knock on my door again. It seemed different now. There hadn't been a knock in hours, and it was much later, plus my friends weren't here, so it seemed creepy. I was surprised that the guy was still doing the prank, if that's what it was. Then there was another knock. I thought that it was maybe one of my friends at that point. Possibly someone forgot something at my place, because the prankster had always only knocked once, so this was unusual. So I walked over to the door. Before opening it, I looked through the peephole though. There was a man standing there who looked like the guy who kept knocking before. Of course, I didn't know for sure. I knew I could open the door and catch him, but he didn't seem to want to run away. He was standing there in a way that he wanted to go inside my apartment or something. He was not in a position to run. I thought that possibly he was going to apologize for pranking me earlier. Still, for some reason, I decided not to answer the door. After a little while, he walked away. Then I went to bed. The next morning after I woke up, I saw police cars parked outside the building from my window. I came to find out that they were there because a man who lived in the building had been attacked. A guy had knocked on his door and then attacked him when he answered it. Thankfully, the man was able to fight the guy off and he left without injuring him. When I heard that, I realized it was probably the same guy who had knocked on my door. I'm really glad that I didn't answer for him. With New Year's coming up, I decided to write my own experience that occurred. It all started 3 years ago. It was New Year's Eve, and I was hanging out with some friends. We went to a bar in the city, and we're just hanging out. As you could imagine, most of the places were pretty busy, and at around midnight, the bar that I was in was especially crowded. My friends and I left the bar that we were at to go to another one. When we were walking down the sidewalk, I noticed on my phone that I had a new text. It was from a number that I did not know, and the text just said hi. Like I said, I didn't know who it was, so I did not text back. I stayed out with my friends for another hour or two. When I got home at about 2 in the morning, I got another text from the number again. It said, "Answer me," in all capitals with exclamation points as well. I texted back asking who it was, but I got no response for the rest of the night. The next morning, the number simply texted me a thumbs down. I was very confused, but figured that it must be a wrong number or something. I didn't really give it any more thought after that. The very next year, on New Year's Eve, I did not go out with friends but was hanging out at a friend's place. Once more, shortly after midnight, I got a text message. I didn't even remember the text from the previous year at all, except when I saw the new text that I got, the previous ones were there as well, and then I remembered. Once more, the text said hi at like 12:01. I responded quickly this time, asking who it was that was texting me. The number did not text me back for an hour. When it did, the person simply said, "I hate you." I was even more confused now. I couldn't think of anybody that would be texting me that. I also had all my contacts in my phone, so it wasn't somebody that I knew. Still, I brought it up with some friends, thinking that it might be somehow a joke. Nobody seemed to know anything about it though. After that, I didn't text the number back, and they didn't text me anything either. That brings us to last year. Once more, I had forgotten all about the number texting me either year. On New Year's last year, I was out with friends again. We went to some bars in the city again. I didn't really go on my phone much, but when I got home, I looked at it. At 12:01, there had been a text sent to me from the same number saying hi again. I texted back asking who it was and why they were texting me every New Year's. They never responded. I haven't heard from them since. But now New Year's is coming up again, and this would be the 4th year in a row that they text me if they do. For some reason, whoever this is remembers to text me every year right after 12 o'clock on New Year's. I can't imagine that it's some kind of a prank, but I have no idea who would be doing this or why. We'll see if it happens again this year. Two years ago, on New Year's Eve, I went out with some friends. It was a group of 4 of us, me, Alexis, Nadia, and Sarah. Nobody had work the next day, and many other people were going out as well. We went to several bars. However, I was not drinking that night. I'm not a huge drinker. I do drink occasionally, but not really that much, and not on the night of this story. Because of this, I was driving everybody home afterwards, which was not a problem because we all live close to each other. So I remember that after we had been at one bar for several hours probably, my friends were getting a little drunk. It was a lively night with it being New Year's Eve, and some of my friends went to the dance floor area in the bar. I stayed sitting at the bar because I didn't really like to go on the dance floor when I'm sober. The bar was crowded, but in the time I was sitting by myself for the most part. When I was, this creepy guy approached me. He stood next to me and said hi and asked to buy me a drink. I said no thanks, I wasn't drinking tonight. The man was probably in his 50s, had a sort of long beard and long hair as well. He then asked me if I wanted to go to a different spot with him. I told him no, I was there with my friends. At that point, he walked away and it didn't seem like a big deal. Through the crowd of people though, I noticed the guy staring at me several times over maybe the next 10 minutes. After a little while, I decided to go over to my friends. They were still dancing and the whole place was very busy. I didn't see the man for a while and lost him in the crowd. After a while longer, my friends and I decided to go to another bar that was nearby. This one was quieter and it was the last one that we were going to for the night. However, not long after arriving, I saw the same guy was there too. I had a bad feeling about him. I stayed near my friends, and luckily the guy did not try to approach me again. He stayed a distance away, but I didn't think it was just a coincidence that he was also at this bar too. I saw him looking over at me several more times, and he didn't seem to be at the bar with anybody. But I wasn't too concerned. I figured we'd leave later and I would never see the guy again. My friends and I stayed at the bar until we all wanted to go back home. It was around 1 o'clock in the morning or so when we did. After leaving the bar, we walked several blocks to where I had parked my vehicle. Then I started driving back. My friends and I live in a city that was only about 10 minutes away. So I don't remember noticing anything until I had dropped everybody off. After leaving Sarah's apartment, I was going to drive back to mine, which was only about 2 minutes away. That's when I noticed a car driving behind me. I didn't think it was suspicious until I drove all the way back to my place and the car was still behind me. I couldn't tell who was driving, but I quickly thought of the man from the bars. I continued the way to my apartment and he stayed right behind me the entire time. When I got to my apartment building, just before entering the parking lot, I pulled over to let the car pass. It did not and also started to pull over. I didn't know what to do, so I drove into the parking lot. I had a parking space in the garage below the building, and only I could open it, but I knew the guy would probably follow me in. I opened the garage door and drove in a ways, but I stopped so that the car could not enter. However, when the garage door started to close, the guy drove forward, nearly running into the back of my car, but stopping the door from closing, and it went back up. When this happened, I quickly hit the gas and drove through the garage. There was another door to the garage on the other end, and I drove through towards it. The car behind me started to follow. I ended up leaving the garage through the other door, and after leaving, I drove back out onto the street, and that's when I finally had the thought to drive to a police station, so I quickly looked up directions. In the time that I was driving there though, the car drove away. He just stopped following me all of a sudden. At that point, I was able to go back home. I'm not sure why he randomly stopped following me when he did, but I'm glad that he did. I didn't see the guy, and I'm sure that it was the man from the bars. I'm glad I haven't seen him since. A couple of years ago, when I was in college, I went to a New Year's Eve party. For a little bit of background, I'm a female and lived on campus, but went home for winter break. My parents' house was only about an hour away from campus, and I had a few friends who went back to school early. There was going to be a New Year's Eve party at one of my best friend's houses on campus, so I went back there for it. First, I went back to my college apartment, and then arrived at my friend's on New Year's Eve at about 5 p.m. I was one of the first people there, and we just kind of hung out until the other people came over. For a long time, it was a lot of fun, and a lot of my college friends were there. But like many college parties that I went to, things soon became a little bit out of control. A lot more people started to show up at like 10 p.m. or so. The college that I went to is a very large university. I'm not sure how many people attend it, but probably well over 20 or 30,000. The house soon had a lot of people that I didn't even recognize in it. I was still having a good time though, until this one guy came up to me. He was a man who looked to be in his late 20s and had a tall, somewhat muscular build. Now, he wasn't jacked or anything, but he also wasn't fat. He was just big. He came right up to me, seeming drunk, and started asking me questions about myself. We talked, but not long into the conversation, he asked if I wanted to leave with him, and I said no. He kept asking, and I soon walked away. It was very crowded, and the guy followed me all around just about wherever I went. By that point, it was probably like midnight, and I decided to just leave. I walked through the crowd of people and found my friends. I told one of them about the guy who was following me, and then I said I would be leaving. I tried to point him out in the crowd, but at that point, I couldn't find him. Then I said bye to my friend, and I left. When I first got outside, I thought that the guy had finally given up. I didn't see him, and I was walking back to my apartment, which was only a few blocks away. But when I started to walk down the street, I heard somebody leaving the house and turned around to see the guy. He yelled at me, asking me where I was going. I told him that I was going home, and he started to walk towards me. Now I was concerned that he was going to follow me all the way back to my apartment. I tried to just ignore him and walk away, and hope that he would stop, but he didn't. I heard him walking down the street after me, trying to catch up. I walked as fast as I could without running. When I made it to where I had to turn, he was still behind me. He was a long ways back, so I tried to lose him. I cut through a random person's yard, and then went through their backyard. Once I got through there, I cut into the next block over, and then walked the other ways down the street. This ended up working, and when I got off of that street, I no longer saw him. I was able to make it back to my apartment, and I even checked outside when I got back to make sure that he didn't somehow follow me. Everything was fine, and I went to bed shortly after. The next day, I went back to my parents' house because classes didn't start for college for about 2 more weeks. After driving back home, I arrived sometime in the early afternoon. It was then that I saw I was added on Snapchat by someone. It was a guy named Jake. I didn't automatically assume that it was the same guy from the night before. My college was so big, and I knew a lot of people and didn't have all of their snaps. To be honest, I got added by people on almost a daily basis. Plus, I didn't even recall this guy telling me his name the night before. But after the guy added me on Snapchat, he said hi to me, and I asked him who he was. He responded saying, "We met last night, remember?" That's when I realized it was the same person. Still, I asked him to clarify. He said he was at the party and then described himself. When he did, I blocked him. I wanted nothing to do with this guy, because after all, he had tried to follow me home. After that, he did not contact me. But the story doesn't end there. That night, I was at my parents' house, in my bedroom. I noticed out of my window a car parked on the side of the road out front. It was kind of weird because our neighborhood was quiet, and everybody's houses had long driveways with plenty of space to park. Plus, the car was parked like 20 feet from our driveway. It was a very typical looking sedan, but I couldn't see if anybody was inside or not because it was too far away. I decided to get up and walk over to the window to get a little bit better view. When I did, literally right when I got to the window, I saw the driver's door open. A man got out, and at first, I had no clue who it was. But then, the guy came into our driveway and walked along the side of it. When he got a little bit closer, I realized it was the same guy. This really blew my mind at first. I was not even near campus. I was at my parents' house, an hour away. Why was he here? I watched him walk all the way up the driveway, but he didn't go into the front yard. Instead, he went around the side of the house and out of my view. It seemed as though he was going into the back. I hurried out of my room and found my parents. I told them about the guy, and then I called the police. We carefully went to a window in the back of the house and looked out to try to see the guy. It was really dark back there, with many opportunities of places for him to hide. We didn't see him, but we knew that he was back there somewhere. For the next few minutes, he remained hidden. Then the police arrived. They came to the front door, and we let them know that the guy was probably hiding in the backyard. Our property was searched, and the man was located. He tried to run away, but was caught before making it off of our property. It turned out that the guy didn't even go to my college. He had found my location through the brief time that he had me on Snapchat, because my location was on. This is an experience that is still almost unbelievable to me to this day. I feel lucky that I noticed the car and saw the man get out. If I didn't, I would not have known that it was his car or that he was hiding in the backyard. What he planned to do, I'm not sure, but I'm glad that we called the police. Each year, when I was a kid, we would celebrate New Year's Eve and stay up late. Normally, I would go to bed at about 10 o'clock, but on New Year's Eve, I would stay up until around 2 a.m. My sister and my parents and I would play board games and watch movies. We would then watch the ball drop when it was midnight and would stay up for several more hours. I think this happened when I was about 12 years old. That time, like any other, we played games and watched a couple of movies. This continued well past midnight, and at roughly 2 a.m., we all got tired and finally decided to go to bed. We could sleep in the next day because nobody had work or school. Our house was on a pretty quiet street. Other than that, it was a pretty typical neighborhood. I stayed up a little bit later than everybody else that night because I was watching a movie in the living room. When it ended, I finally went to bed. I remember getting back into my bedroom and turning out the lights. When I did, I could see very clearly into the front yard because of the moonlight. There was a woman standing in our yard. She was not facing me, and I didn't recognize her. I walked over to the window, and when I did, the woman turned and faced me. She saw me and then started to walk closer into my direction. This really creeped me out. Nobody was supposed to be in our front yard. Nothing like this had ever happened before. I moved away from the window and hid. I ducked down and laid on the floor so that she couldn't see me. My window was pretty large, and I did not have a cover on it at the time. Now, my bedroom was also on the second floor, so she couldn't directly reach me, but I was still terrified. I waited there, just hoping that she would go away. A few minutes went by. Then I heard something hit my window. I wasn't sure as to what it was. I started watching my window and something else hit it. The woman was throwing sticks at it. She was trying to get my attention, and I don't know why, but I got up. I carefully looked out of the window again. The woman was still there and looking right up at me, this time closer. She said something, but I couldn't hear her. Then I saw her motioning for me to let her inside. I was not going to do that. She then walked to the side of the yard near the front door. Then she knocked on the front door. I didn't move. I was hoping that my parents or sister would wake up. I didn't have the thought to call the police for some reason. It just never entered my mind. The woman knocked on the door on and off for like 5 minutes. Finally, she walked away. I watched her from the window walk to the end of the driveway and then a little ways down. She then got inside of a vehicle and drove off. The whole situation was really bizarre, and it really confused me. The next morning, I told my parents about it. They had no idea what she could have been doing either. Luckily, though, she never came back. This happened just last year. It was New Year's Eve, and my wife and I were having friends over to our house. There were about 10 other people coming over, and we were going to have somewhat of a party. After everybody arrived, we had some food and I talked with everyone. We played some games as well. My wife and I have a house that has about a 2-acre yard and is somewhat out in the country. At 12 o'clock, we all went outside and into the backyard behind the house to open champagne. Obviously, we didn't want to open it inside and have it spray all over the furniture. Plus, it wasn't that cold out. We stayed outside in the backyard for maybe a total of 10 minutes. Then everybody went back in. All of our friends stayed until roughly 1 a.m. and then started leaving. By 1:30, everyone was gone. My wife and I cleaned up a bit and were very tired. I remember that my wife went upstairs to our bedroom and I was finishing up loading the dishwasher downstairs in the kitchen. After I did so, I started to walk away and I heard what I thought was my wife walking down the hallway. The hallway was out of my sight. It was kind of near the stairs, and I was around the corner from it. I called out my wife's name, wondering why she had come back down, but she didn't answer me. I remember that I walked over there, which took me maybe 10 seconds. When I got there, I saw nothing. I was sort of confused, but I figured that my wife hadn't heard me calling for her, and she just went back upstairs. I went upstairs and then got ready for bed. I didn't bother to ask her if she had just been downstairs or anything. So after I got ready, I turned out the lights and got in bed. Everything became silent, and that's when my wife asked me if I heard that. I hadn't heard anything. I sat up and asked her what she had heard, and she told me that it sounded like somebody was walking around downstairs. I listened close, and then I sort of heard it. I walked over to the doorway and opened it up very quietly. Now I could hear much better, and somebody was definitely down there. They must have been who I had heard earlier. It really creeped me out. But then, I heard the footsteps starting to walk up the stairs. I quickly closed the door back up and locked it. My wife already had her phone and was dialing 911. We then went into the bathroom connected to our bedroom, which also had a locking door on it. This would give us a little bit of extra space and safety. We were told that the police would be there within 10 minutes. As we were inside of the bathroom, we didn't really hear much. We were both trying to figure out who the person in the house was and how they had got in. Then, out of nowhere, I heard somebody banging on our bedroom door. I did my best to try to ignore it. Hopefully, whoever was there would not be able to break through. This went on for quite some time though. At one period, it stopped, but then it picked back up again several minutes later. Finally, at last, the police arrived. When they did, they entered the house, and I heard them yelling from downstairs. I really couldn't hear what they were saying though. We did not leave the bathroom because it wasn't safe to come out yet. We heard yelling on and off for the next 10 minutes. Finally, we heard police officers' voices and we were told that it was safe. The person inside of our house was a man who we didn't know. He was caught and had snuck into the house after we all went outside. Then he hid until we were going to go to bed. When the police got there, he threatened them and claimed to have a weapon, even though we didn't. Eventually, they were able to get him to come downstairs. I think the guy was on drugs or something. He did mess up our house a little bit, but I'm glad that everyone was okay. I still can't believe that while our friends and us were inside, the guy was hiding in our house somewhere. That was the craziest New Year's Eve ever. This happened 3 years ago at a New Year's party. It was New Year's Eve night, and I was having several friends over at my house. My house was really close to the city and in a busy neighborhood. It was a 2-bedroom, 2-story house, and at the time, I had only lived there for a few months. Most of my friends and the people that I invited were from work. We all worked for a fairly large company, and most of us were in the same department. At first, it was just going to be about 5 of us, but soon around the office, the word spread, and a few other people asked if they could come by. I said sure, and I was excited, because I felt like the more people, the more fun it would be. Most people were going to bring something, like a food or a drink, and then we could all share and play some games and stuff. My house is more space than I need, so I felt like I could set it up really nice for everyone. When New Year's Eve came, people started showing up at about 6 p.m. It started with my best friend Ben, then a few more people came. Before I knew it, there were probably 15 or so of my friends and coworkers there. We had lots of snacks and played a few games. I remember at one point, there was this one guy inside that I did not recognize. I wasn't really sure who he came with. I noticed that he was talking to Rachel, who was one of my coworkers, and I assumed that maybe he came with her, or at least he knew her. because they looked like they were deep into a conversation. Later on, I saw the guy again, and this time, he was just kind of standing in the corner. It seemed a little suspicious to me, so I decided to ask a couple of people if they knew who he was. Nobody that I spoke with knew, however. I decided that I would go locate Rachel and ask her who the guy was. When I found her, she was in the dining room, sitting at the table, talking with another coworker. I tapped her on the shoulder and asked her who she had been talking to. She told me that she had no idea who the guy was, but she thought that he was acting like a creep towards her. She then told me that the guy said he was an old friend of mine. I got nervous when I heard this. I was sure that I didn't know this guy at all, and I had no clue how or why he was here. I knew that I would have to ask him to leave, but I really didn't want to. Confronting people or causing a conflict is usually something I try to avoid. I walked back out to the living room and looked to the same corner of the room that I had seen him standing in, but he was now gone. I was thinking and hoping that he had left, and I felt a little bit relieved. I went over and asked one of my friends, Jake, who was nearby, if the guy had left, but instead, Jake told me that the guy had gone upstairs. My relieved feeling went away immediately. There was no reason for the guy to go upstairs. The whole party was downstairs, and I had a feeling the guy was up to no good. I found Ben and told him about the guy going upstairs. He agreed to go upstairs with me to check in case the guy was dangerous or something. We both walked up the staircase and into the dark hallway, which had 2 bedrooms, a bathroom, and a closet. We both immediately noticed that the door to the spare bedroom was closed, and it had been opened before. I knocked on the door, asking who was in there, trying to sound confident, but probably sound scared instead. Nobody answered, though. We both went back downstairs. I was hoping that the guy would come back down and leave, and decided that if he didn't leave within the hour, I would call the police. By this time, it was pretty late and nearly midnight. We remained downstairs for a while, probably more than an hour, and after midnight, people started leaving. Ben stayed with me to make sure that the guy would leave, though. When everyone else was gone, and it was just me, Ben, and the mysterious man, we went back upstairs. This time, we went straight to the closed guest bedroom door and knocked on it. We said we were going to call the police if the man didn't leave now. We both waited for a response. Things were silent for about 10 seconds. Then, we heard the sound of somebody walking behind us. We turned around to just barely see the guy going down the stairs and out of sight. After that, the front door opened and shut. The guy was now gone. He must have been hiding in my bedroom instead of the guest bedroom. Ben and I were just happy that he was gone now. The craziest part is that he didn't steal anything at all. This makes me worry if he came here just to harm somebody. Luckily, he left when I threatened to call the police. For some background, I'm a female, and this took place a few years ago. I was invited by some of my friends to go to a New Year's Eve celebration in the city. I live about 10 minutes away from a large city, and every year they have activities in the city for New Year's Eve. I had never been to it before, and usually we would just go to somebody's house. There were about 5 of us meeting up at 10 p.m. that night. I had to work and didn't get off until after 9 p.m., so I couldn't get there right when the rest of my friends did. I got back from work, changed, and then left. When I got to the city, my friends had only just got there, and they told me where they were. Unfortunately for me, I'm always really bad with directions. It was really hard to find a parking space, but finally I was able to. I had to park a distance away though, and when I finally did park, I wasn't as familiar with that particular area. I got out of my car. It was a smaller looking park, and I knew I had to walk about 8 blocks. It was surprisingly dark and quiet when I started walking. After going maybe 2 or 3 blocks, I felt like I was going in the wrong direction, and I was a little bit confused. I wasn't seeing very many people at all, and if I had been going the right way, I should have probably started to see them by now. I took out my phone and looked at the map, but I was still confused. As I was standing there looking, I heard a voice from behind me. It startled me, and I saw a guy standing there. He was pretty tall and had on a black coat. He looked slightly older than me, and asked if I was going to the New Year's event. I told him that I was, and he told me he was going there as well. This made me feel good because I was having a tough time figuring things out. The guy started walking, and I followed him. He walked a few feet in front of me, and we went a few blocks down the street. However, after a few minutes, I just felt like we weren't going in the right direction still. I wasn't seeing many other people at all, but I kept following the guy. We walked for another minute or so, and then the man slowed down and started to walk next to me all of a sudden. I slowed down too because I was kind of confused as to what he was doing. That's when he grabbed my arm. When he did, he shoved me to the right near the street. There were lots of cars parked on the side of the street still, and he pushed me towards one, and then I saw it unlock. It must be his car. I told the guy to let me go, but he didn't say anything. He just kept pushing me, and then told me to get inside of his car. I was trying to get away and struggling with the man. He was starting to overpower me and had opened his car door. I thought for a moment that I wasn't going to be able to get away, but somehow, when I kicked him, his grip loosened a little. Then I kicked him again. I was able to just get free enough to push him and then start to run away. But when I did, he chased after me. I ran directly across the street and back to the park. I kept running until I didn't hear him chasing after me anymore. I had no clue where I was anymore at this point, and I called one of my friends. After a few minutes, I was able to figure things out and find the right direction of how to get to them. The rest of the time walking towards them, I was really nervous, but eventually I did get there. I also called the police once I was with my friends, and I told them about the whole situation. At the end of the day, I feel very lucky to be alive after that. This happened on December 31st, 2020. We visited my aunt's house to stay there for their New Year's party. She invited the whole family there each year for New Year's Eve. On this night, it was around 11 p.m. I was just on my phone watching YouTube videos and being bored. I then heard Luna, my aunt's dog, barking at the window. I was confused at first, but I just looked at the window without thinking. When I did, I thought I saw a person's head, but it ducked down like half a second later. I nearly had a heart attack about what I saw. I looked out the window to see the person, but to my surprise, they weren't there. It was also pitch black, so I couldn't see a thing. I told Luna that we were seeing things, then she calmed down. After around 30 minutes later, my mom called me saying that it was time for board games. I was excited about that because I was usually really good at them. We were on our third game, which was Jenga, when all of a sudden the power went out. We were all confused at first, and so were the dogs. A few minutes went by, and my dad and two of my uncles decided to take a look at the generator, which was outside the house. They went outside and turned the power back on, but as soon as they did, we saw a person which was about 6 feet tall running towards them. We heard noises of men fighting. Meanwhile, one of my aunts was on the line with the police. The police said they would arrive within 5 to 10 minutes, but that was not what I wanted to hear, because I know the fight would take like 2 minutes to finish up, and sure enough, it did. The person took off running to the backyard into the woods. After about 5 minutes, the police arrived and did a search of the woods, but the man wasn't found. The police told us that they would patrol the area for about an hour. That made me feel better, but I was still worried that the man might come back. After the police left, we went back to our board games, and at around 12:40, our family was leaving. We got into the car and drove home. However, that's not the end of my story, because I woke up at 2:30 in the morning to the sound of a car outside my window. I looked outside, and sure enough, it was the same man from my aunt and uncle's house. I got up and went to my parents' room and woke them up. My dad looked out my window and saw the man walking towards our backyard, holding a crowbar. My mom took out her phone and called the police, and they said they would arrive in 5 minutes. The man, meanwhile, was at our back door trying to break in, but he didn't succeed. The police arrived and arrested the man. I felt way better and was able to sleep well that night. That was a couple of years ago, but I remember it like it was yesterday. To this day, I get creeped out to think of what the man would have done to us.
What you're about to hear is the most traumatic experience of my life. It was New Year's Eve, and me and my girlfriend, let's call her Jane, were getting ready to see some fireworks. Jane and I knew a great spot deep in the woods where we could see the fireworks. We left at about 9:30 because the fireworks show was starting at 10. We made sure to pack some food, water, flashlights, and even a compass in case we got lost. We parked our car on the side of the road and made our way to the spot. I would say it was about a 15-minute walk or so until we reached the spot, which was a huge clearing surrounded by woods on all sides. Jane and I sat down and started watching the fireworks show. About 15 minutes into the show, Jane looked at the woods and said, "Did you see that?" I was confused and looked in the direction of the woods, but I saw nothing. I told her it was probably just a deer, and we continued watching the fireworks show. 5 minutes passed by and I had completely forgotten about the incident until Jane told me to shush. I was confused and asked why. She then asked me, "Do you hear that?" I listened closely and could hear leaves crunching and twigs snapping. I looked in the direction of the sound and could somewhat make out the figure of a man. At first, I didn't believe it, but then a bright firework lit up the night sky along with the woods, and I could now clearly see a man about 6'3" walking towards us. Now I'm 6'5" and believed I could easily take on this man if he wants trouble, but that all changed when another firework revealed a large knife in his hand. I told Jane to run, and we both darted back into the woods to the direction of our car. All the while this man was running about 20 feet behind us. After about 2 or 3 minutes of running, we managed to lose the guy, and we arrived at my car. When we did, I made a horrifying discovery. All 4 of my tires had been slashed. We didn't know what to do. My car wouldn't be able to drive, and there was a maniac trying to kill us, and all the while Jane was going crazy. I tried calling 911, but just my luck, I had no service way out there in the woods. Luckily, we saw a truck coming down the road, and Jane quickly flagged the driver down. The driver parked behind us, and a large dude stepped out of the truck. We quickly explained to him what was going on, and he got back into his truck and pulled out a gun along with a satellite phone. We used the satellite phone and called the police. They said they would be there in about 5 to 7 minutes. While we were waiting, Jane investigated the woods and then screamed. I quickly looked over to the direction she was looking, and I saw the man walking towards us. Jane yelled that it was him, and the driver of the truck then took one ground look at him and fired a warning shot. The gunshot sent the man running back into the woods. After 3 minutes of waiting in fear, the cops arrived. They called in a team to check the woods, along with a AAA truck to fix my car. The rest of the night was me and Jane at the police station. We tried to give the best description of the man that we could, but because it was so dark, I could barely make out his face. I don't know what would have happened if Jane didn't spot the man, but we've never been back to that spot since. This story happened to me on New Year's Eve 3 years ago. It was my senior year of high school, and my friend Jake was having a New Year's party at his house. His parents happened to be away for a few days at a wedding, so it was the typical perfect situation for a party. Jake and I were pretty close friends, and we went way back, so of course I was one of the first people that he invited. At first I was under the impression that it was just going to be about 6 or 7 of us hanging out. And that's exactly how it started for the first 15 minutes or so. But then Jake announced that some more people were coming over. Over the next hour or so, there was a steady stream of kids coming into the house. It quickly seemed to turn into a high school house party. Before I knew it, the house was packed with mainly kids from our high school, as well as some kids that I had never seen before. Despite it being New Year's Eve, I still had a curfew at my parents' house, so once 11 p.m. hit, I decided to find Jake and tell him that I was leaving to go home. The party was mostly in the living room, as well as the entire front part of the house. He had closed off the door to his kitchen, indicating that he didn't want people going in there. I had seen Jake go in and out of the kitchen, and I thought he was in there, so I opened the door and entered it. It was completely empty, except for the corner next to the fridge. But it wasn't Jake there. There was a freakishly tall man standing there with his back turned to me. It really took me by surprise, as it was definitely not a high school kid, and wasn't Jake's dad either. The man had to be almost 7 feet tall, was probably in his late 20s, and had a really strange overall look to him. I stood there staring for a good 3 or 4 seconds. As soon as he started to casually turn and look at me, I closed the door back up and walked back down the hall to where a good 30 kids were. I was able to locate Jake in the crowd and asked him who the tall man in his kitchen was. It took a minute or so to get it across to Jake. He was having a good time and didn't seem to care at first. But I told him again, and he seemed confused, so I told him to come with me. I explained to him as we went to the kitchen, and he seemed to be slightly concerned. But when we got to the kitchen and opened the door, we didn't see anything at all. Jake went into the kitchen and looked around, as well as calling out for anybody that was in there to come out. But nobody was in there at all. We figured the tall man must have left, because there was no way to leave the house through the kitchen unless the man were to climb out the window, and none of the windows seemed to be messed with. We went back out to where the party was going on, and we asked several kids if they had seen a tall man at all, to which they all said no. Jake then ended his party shortly after that, and people all started to leave. Jake was a little concerned that the man still might be in his house somewhere, so I stayed back after everybody left to help search the house, along with our friends Jordan and Mike. We didn't find anybody still, and I went home while Jordan and Mike stayed at Jake's house with him for the night. The next morning when I woke up, I had several missed calls from Jake. I called him back, and the three of my friends told me how they had heard the front door shut at around 3 in the morning, and when they all went down, they didn't see anybody in the house, but saw a very tall man walking down the street far away. This story happened last year on New Year's Eve. A friend group of the 4 of us got together at my friend Jennifer's apartment for New Year's Eve. It was a fun night, and we played games and watched a movie. We had a New Year's celebration, and at about 2 in the morning, most of us called it a night. We were all young women and lived in a pretty large city, and had walked to her apartment. The other girls left before me because I stayed back to help Jennifer with something. When I finally left, it was about 2:15 in the morning. It was roughly a 10-minute walk to get back to my apartment, which was a few blocks away. I walked down the sidewalk outside of Jennifer's place and saw there was a decent amount of people outside for this hour, probably because of it being New Year's. Then I had to pass by a park to get to my apartment, which was a little bit less in the city. The park was much quieter. It took up several blocks in itself and was sort of creepy to walk by so late at night, but I had done it a couple of times in the past. I did, however, start to hear movement coming from the bushes to my right in the park not too long after I started walking by. The park was more of hiking trails and woods than really a park, and the bushes and trees were pretty dense. I thought it was a squirrel at first, but I quickly realized that it was far too big to be one. As I walked along the sidewalk, it seemed to move right along with me. I looked into the bushes, but I really couldn't see too much with how dense the bushes were and the only light being from a dim street light. I decided to just keep walking, and I reached into my purse just to be prepared for the worst. The noise started to die down, and just when I was starting to feel relieved, I came up on the darkest part of the park where there was no street light, and I heard the noise of bushes getting extremely loud. Then I saw a man pop out of the bushes onto the sidewalk right in front of me. All I could make out was that he was slightly taller than me and had a hood on. He lunged at me almost immediately, and that's when I took my hand out of my purse and sprayed the man with my pepper spray. At first I was afraid it wasn't working because he got a tight grasp on both of my arms, and he didn't let go, but as I struggled and continued to spray, we both ended up falling to the ground. And after being on the ground, he got up and ran back into the woods. I got up and sprinted to my apartment. I kept looking around to make sure I wasn't being followed, and when I got back and felt safe, I called the police. As they were on the way, I called my friends who had been at the party with me. When I told them the story, they told me that they too had heard the noise of something in the bushes beside them. However, a man never came out and lunged at them, probably because there was 3 of them walking together. The police arrived and took down information and then searched the park, but as far as I know, the man was never found.